so direction of play, positional judgment, and reading. Doing one pass through each of those, using that as the frame of reference as we do each review for it, and then compiling all three together in a cohesive review at the end of each week for, I believe, 2 games at a time.
Yeah.
My initial part of this process is to do some pass through contraing to identify what AI might consider to be egregious blunders. Anything over 3 points is what I have it currently set up for. Big enough mistakes that at the pro level it will make a difference. And then I will be filtering through and finding out which one of those we can definitively say were mistakes, and pointing out which one of those were more likely strategic concessions. As some of you know, with handicaps specifically, a lot of Shusaku's early games are handicap games, and his playstyle is going to be a little bit different in those games than when he's playing even. And you'll get to see that transition, and those mistakes begin to gradually, I'm going to use air quotes here, disappear as the handicaps gradually lessen over time, and then increase in the opposite direction. One thing noteworthy for Honinbo Shusaku, for those who might not be as familiar with him or his game style, is he put a very heavy emphasis on balance. He liked to keep the territory relatively close, and then develop positional advantages through optimal exchanges in the middle game. And this gave him a very, very, very astute sense of positional judgment specifically. And that's going to be the first fundamental that we are going to do our pass looking through. Now, the way that I tend to define positional judgment is being able to notice a change on the board happening in real time. So when you look at a board position, for example, and you're evaluating what's going on the board, what's important, maybe what's big, what's going to happen next, that's all in the positional judgment category. Being able to take that raw information, process it, and figure out a path forward. We're going to be starting with the first two Shusaku games using that frame of lens, basically, where we try to look at positions on the board and really figure out, okay, what's the next important area? What's likely to be played next? From that point, we're going to move on to direction of play, where we're going to look at the movement of stones across the board. How do stones flow from one part of the board to the next? How do stones in one area of the board impact another part of the board? And the sort of micro and macro cohesion that goes on, umbrellaed under the term direction of play. And then as we're doing this, and the first 2 games pass from position to direction, 2 more games will be sent to position, and then it will keep building and building. The third step is to do a calculative review under the reading branch, which is going to be an assessment of local fighting, tactical variations, actually doing the legwork to really try to read a lot of these variations we might consider ourselves in the context of the games as they were played back then. So the reading branch will have less of an emphasis on the opening, more so, and more of an emphasis on the middle game fighting that Shusaku is known for. Very often he would calculate very complex variations and often choose the simplest, most balanced variation that will achieve the victory. And that's what we're going to be looking for. Then in our synthesis stage, we're going to be sort of combining each of these individual review points to create a cohesive umbrella review with the main points from each, as well as the supplementary Katago analysis that I'll be doing in the beginning, and then presenting those with through Trovoke as our medium on his streams. Any questions so far?
One thing to note while people take a quick look around Discord, you have 2 options. One of them is to just become a speaker because you're a stage moderator. The other one is going to be to ask to speak by raising your hand, or you can put a message in the SSP general channel. Positive asks if you can do the reading part. Ideally, we all do all the parts, man.
I mean, if he wants to work on like reading stuff, then
he can absolutely.
I'm certainly okay with him doing that. That's less reading I have to do.
Yeah, right.
For me specifically, the positional judgment I think is the part that I would be the most eager to do if I get to pick one. Mm, yeah, it's important that I think everybody gets a little bit of flavor of all of it because we're going to be doing this for 400 games, 460 games.
Yep.
Um, I can tell you, having gone through Invincible 400 times, um, you can get a lot out of studying Shusaku games. And the 400 was not an overestimate. I spent it's the only Go book I read exclusively for the first 7 years I played Go, and I read it every day and replayed all the games in it. There's a lot. There's a lot of really good information in there. A lot of things that you might find surprising between Shusaku and AI. A lot of differences that you might find appalling between Shusaku and AI. And hopefully we'll be able to see kind of a little bit of that with the OGS review that I posted. Now I was telling Trevoke earlier that I haven't had a chance to really parse this out yet, meaning I haven't looked through it to identify the commentary. But I can bring us through an example really quick using this game of how we can use each lens to sort of break down a game review. So if everyone can join us, please. The OGS link was posted in SSP above Positive's comment. Once everybody's here, I can start. It looks like we've got just about everyone, right?
Yeah.
I'm assuming Draco is DE.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect, perfect. And so this game, obviously, this is going to be one of Shisaku's early works. He starts off with a 3-stone handicap. So we expect his play to be more direction based and more judgment, not trying to get into too many reading complications given the overwhelming advantage that he has. And already you can see in the beginning, he takes an influence stone with C7 and then locks out the corner with D3, immediately denying white the opportunity to catch up quickly in territory with the Sansan invasion. Back in the early days, for those that might not be aware, I'm sure Positive was, but in case Draco isn't, there was no Komi at this time, so white does not have a point cushion at the beginning of the game. Even in today's games, when white is playing against handicap, very often the Komi is only half a point, if any at all, and that's to break ties. So one of the first key markers that we can think about are Shusaku's first two choices here. If we're looking at judgment, we can kind of evaluate what the general strategy is going to be just from the flavor of these two moves. Yep. And so we've even got some commentary here. I didn't realize that these SGFs had commentary, Trevoke.
Oh, this is the one I shared with you before. This was the one I did
Right,
when I was
right,
stuck
right.
on the plane. The other SGFs won't
Right,
have commentary
right. Okay,
yet.
so we can see White's judgment. White's playing quickly. He knows he has to catch up. Cochrane will give Black about 30-point lead with a 3-stone handicap, and that, amongst professional players, is a lot to handle. So he's got to play quickly and try to start complications if he wants to catch up. And again, we see the same large knights approach, and then Shusaku finally comes in. Um, these two stones, if we're trying to judge why Shusaku felt playing p4 was better, this is an opportunity of why we can think about why A versus B. What's the judgment here? Um, we'll make this a pop quiz for Positive. I think he's the second strongest player in our group right now. Why do you think Shusaku chose A and not B? I hope you don't mind I'm putting your audience on the spot, Trevo.
No, not at all. Just remember this is recorded for others too.
Mm-hmm. Clear. Right. If White's able to get a more centralized position, it's going to be easier for White to fight. And so we can see he's breaking up the formation to make use of the two mark stones. He wants to keep his positional advantage that he's playing for with both of these. And we know it's a positional advantage because when you play the Silgema, White always has the option to steal the corner with Sansan, and Black is going to usually end up taking an influence. So, just as an example, one old Joseki you might have seen back in the day would be something like this, where White would take a corner and Black would get the outside. And so this is why we can say that Black is playing positionally here. And White begins to consolidate, trying to catch up some of the territory. And again, Shusaku chooses the middle because it's harder to deal with the Moyo than to deal with White's territory. Black still has a very comfortable territory lead. And then we see him sealing off the outside. And so the judgment that we're going to be looking at for this particular game, we can identify very quickly is how is Shusaku going to use control of the center of the board to suppress White's ability to make up the advantage. Now, if we take that type of analysis and we transition to direction of play, what we're going to be looking at is what direction are the Blackstones facing, and can we identify where Black's going to go next? What's the flow going to look like? And so we see Black creating this influence on the outside with these moves. In direction of play, how is White going to use good direction to fight against this? And how is Black going to use good direction to keep global cohesion? And White immediately starts by trying to work against the weakest part of the Black influence, which is this one. And it's weakest because of the cutting point at A. Black fixes by attaching on top. This has a common shape. White backs off to create weaknesses in this knight's move shape, as well as remove forcing moves from Black. Black pushes on top, again, switching now to this type of center control. As you can see how the direction is changing. Black is forcing White down and again pointing his stones more effectively towards the center of the board. White Hanes extends, and again, Black is just giving up the territory because it's going to be easier to deal with White's points than to allow White to have a good central position. So hopefully with this, the idea of direction of play becomes a little bit clear. If it's still a little bit fuzzy for anybody, please let me know. Looks good. All right, perfect. I'm going to assume for Jake it's good as well. And for a lot of the reading stuff, everything has been relatively peaceful so far. We haven't had much that we need to read, but this is the first instance maybe where Black might actually have to start doing a calculation. And this is because Black has two directions he can go to try to achieve his same goal, right? He could do A, B, or C and try to maintain center control. Direction might influence this one way or another, but Black also has to calculate the weaknesses that are going to be left behind after with each one of these. In the game, he chooses to block from the B side because he's got the pincering stone. He can put a lot more pressure on F17. His friends are closer. If we had blocked from the other side, his stone on the left side is much farther away. So it's going to be easier for White to settle. For example, White even has enough space to make a base here. That's not exactly true for A. And then White attaches to make the base anyway. Now we have our first point of contact. And we have to calculate, does Black accept the invitation to start a fighting? Or does Black try to simplify? This is where the reading step comes into play, because if we do accept, then we're going to be playing Hane A or B. If we would like to refuse, we are going to be extending 1 or 2, which would be our more solid options. And this is what we have to start thinking about. This will be what will be covered in our reading step. And then we'll be taking each of those individual points at the end, creating the one cohesive review where we can sort of illustrate how all of them are interplayed together through the execution of the general strategy of the game and the tactics, and kind of get an idea of maybe what's going on inside the mind of Shusaku as he's playing these games. Oh, that took less time than I expected it would, Trevok. Am I missing anything?
I think that you did a great job covering how we would use positional judgment, direction of play, and reading in this game. But I think for folks who aren't at the level of positive, who don't really know the skills of positional judgment, direction of play, and even reading, which I think we assume we know because we say Tsumigo, right? It might be worth going over a couple of the checklist items to look at on the given a board position of this is positional judgment, this is direction of play.
Okay. So kind of like the list then.
Something like that.
So for those that don't know, there's a list in Go. basically a way that you can assess every move that you make, whether or not the move that you're making is going to make some type of logical sense. The simplest variation of this list is three questions. Am I okay? Is he okay? What's the big area? And the fundamentals of Go are sort of reflected in this. And the list, the important part about this list is that it's recursive, meaning you don't just stop at one step. You go through all the steps all the time. So, first step, white has now contacted to black. The first question we have to ask ourselves, am I okay? Do I have any weak groups that can be hurt or harassed? And so now we begin our checklist. Does black have any weak groups? If we look at this corner, we can consider this one group. Is this black group weak? No. Okay, we move on to the next group. Is this black group weak? No. It's got access to the center, plenty of space where it can make eyes. It's a wall, so it's generating influence. Usually walls are not weak unless completely surrounded. This black group is totally safe. As for the corner group, it's safe because it's got access to the center of the board, and it also has access to make a base in the corner by descending to S15. So at least two ways the corner can go, the corner is safe. This black corner has an iron pillar shape, many liberties, hard to capture, very thick. C7, an optimal expansion from a very thick shape. Not very easy for white to invade and disrupt the black position without allowing black to the outside, where again, black has a lot of space out here. So this black group also okay. And that brings us into question this group. Is this black group okay? Well, this one's a little bit more questionable because the square whitestone can see, we can draw a line of sight directly into where black's base would be. Black doesn't have a stable base yet because black has not blocked white's access to it. Conversely, we can draw a line of sight between these two stones. And black is right on or slightly behind the line of sight here, so black's access to the center is a little bit restricted as well. The group does not yet have two eyes, nor does it have shape. So these black stones are not the strongest. Okay, so we've identified it. And then the last question would be the K17 stone. Is the K17 stone an important stone? And if it is it weak? Can it be hurt? Then the next step would be identifying, okay, if both of these are places where we're interested in defending, we should pick the weakest one and defend that area. So looking at this position, I would be assessing, do I think K17 is weaker or do I think D16 is weaker? For sake of argument, let's say the D16 group is weak enough that I think it warrants a move. So we're going to spend a move to defend it. The next question is how? We can move. There's a couple of options that we can use when defending weak groups. The first option is to lean on a strong group. So if white has any strong stones nearby that we can't really attack for profit, we should play forcing moves against that group because we don't care if that group gets stronger. And by adding stones to our group and Sente like that, we can make our group strong enough to play in the next big area. And the next step, if we don't have that option, is to identify step 2 of the list. Does my opponent have any weak groups that can be hurt or harassed? And if our opponent does, then that's an option to look at. So going down to step 2, we can look at all the white groups. This group on the right-hand side, safe, plenty of space to make two eyes. Has a move on the second line, so black's access on one half of it is blocked. Good eye space. White's got a group in the corner, which has already managed to achieve half an eye at P3. We say half because depending on if black plays first at O2 or white plays first at N2, there will be an eye here. And white has plenty of space in the corner with 11 points of territory to make two eyes if he needed to make them locally. Usually the magic number in the corner is 8. On the bottom side, these two stones are questionable. They're stuck between two black spheres of influence. We essentially have two walls sort of surrounding them. Their base is able to be exploited with something like C or D. And even if they tried to elevate to the center with E or F, black has stones on the outside that are able to suppress that. White will still be behind black's line of sight. And again, if any of this is unclear or if it sounds like I might be moving a little too fast, please stop me. Just because I need to make sure that this is cohesive enough. Sometimes my explanations for these can be a little bit long-winded. And the white group on the top side, also questionable. Just like we drew a line between the white stones, right? And we said black was behind it. White is also behind black's enemy lines. White is also surrounded. And then this group here on the left side also does not have a base yet. This group is unsettled. Well, now here comes the question. White's got 3 different areas that are weak. Black has one questionable stone at K17 and one questionable corner with the D16 area. How do we decide how to defend our areas and exploit our opponents? Well, generally speaking, we look for White's weakest group and we attack it. Or we look for the one that affects the biggest area first and we attack it. And by attacking our opponent's weakness, we can stave the pressure off of our own weakness, provided that their weakness is harder to deal with than ours or bigger than ours.
Are you able to draw a line of any sorts between the way you shifted between positional judgment and direction of play just now?
So direction is kind of in relation to the attack from the big area mentality. For example, if black wanted to attack white from the big area, black could Hane at A. Because the big area is going to be the center of the board, right? This is really where there's going to be the most territory for black to be moving to, and all of his stones want to move in that direction. If we want to have more of a judgment focus, then we can try to weaken white the other way. This direction is not working cohesively the same way with the rest of the wall because black is retreating to a lower position rather than a higher position here. But the idea is by removing white's base, it's going to be harder for white to get a tactical advantage against the corner. So he's defending the corner by attacking the base here. If this group is weak, the corner cannot be cut, is what black is saying. So that's kind of the judgment move would be the J18 idea. The consistent direction idea would be force white to live small, just take the middle. Is that a good line or still fuzzy?
I think that's probably good enough to get started. If others have questions, they should definitely ask them now. But
yes.
Obviously, I think the important part from what you just said is that it's important to connect the ideas together and then choose one that fits, and then, well, not choose,
Yes.
but do the synthesis of all these ideas together so that you can choose a move that makes sense for your strategy and the board.
Right. Precisely. And in the game, Shusaku chose B. And this was the number 2 move, according to the AI. The number 1 move, if anyone can guess, was playing A. And the reason is because just simple direction of play logic, A is like the move that makes the most sense. You want to cover from the top side because all of your stones are facing the center. And directionally, you want to move your stones against the left side next. For example, even if white is able to somehow make a life, right? White still has to deal with the attack on the left side. And as black begins to elevate and get more friends in the center, these 2 stones get weaker and weaker. Why? This is more positional judgment, right? Because things are always in motion and go. And so if one area of the board becomes more interesting, then conversely, somewhere else had to become less interesting. They're connected. Ergo, if a group is getting strong, then something that was not as strong nearby should be getting weaker in tandem with it. And it's important to pay attention to that when we're looking at judgment. And so this idea presented by like AI, for example, is focusing on the 2 mark stones on the bottom side. It doesn't actually care about any of these stones. because it knows it's going to get the most profit squeezing the K and F stones, because all of black's friends are getting ready to suppress them to the third line. But Shusaku's judgment, he wanted to handle his local deficiency by weakening white's base. And white began to make complications. White has to start a fight if white wants to catch up. So white crosscut. Jake wanted to do all the reading stuff, right? So this is a move I would expect that he would have thought about. It's kind of an only move, because if white just simply follows black's directions, white's not going to get anywhere, right? Even if white made some type of base like this is not a very comfortable shape. And white had to pay a lot of territory for black to do this. Right? That's the trade-off here, the judgment, looking at those trade-offs. And again, we have our brute force calculations for how black is going to settle out of this area. But black is going to do his calculations based on the other two fundamentals. And this is an important concept. This is how you can synthesize everything at the reading step, and why reading is often last. You need to know what you're reading for, right? Everyone here is familiar with AlphaGo, yes? If anyone is not familiar with AlphaGo, please post it in the game chat or an SSP. But I'm pretty sure by now everyone is familiar with AlphaGo. AlphaGo ran off of multiple neural networks. There was a policy network and a value network, and then a Monte Carlo tree search that helped the calculation. But that sounds an awful lot like direction, judgment, and reading, doesn't it?
If you're going to get technical about it, yeah.
Yeah, you can draw the parallel. The policy network is the network that suggests to AlphaGo the next possible candidate moves, the big areas to look at. Interesting points, right? The value network assesses the legitimacy of each one of those, and the calculation network reads down each tree branch based on the given set data of moves. And you can use the fundamentals of Go in tandem the same way. So here, Shusaku is going to use his judgment of the position to simplify the fighting variation and make a concession to white. But he's going to make a concession in such a way that he maintains good direction, and the net trade is going to be positive for black. And that's where the direction and the judgment came in. The reading is just him trying to figure out how to execute that idea. And he starts with the Satari, because white must extend, and then he can simply connect back. And now white has a problem. Which one do you defend, A or B, and how? Right? If white plays the game move, this is a Tesuji, right? If white simply took the ladder, right, you can read in your head whether this ladder works or not. It's going to connect out to black, so black would just fight. If white extends, white's going to die here locally. There's an issue with the double hane in the shape. And so that one's not going to be possible. And if white extends, black has a helper, so we know we can't do this one. And you can see how black is making use of these stones. What happens if white turns? This is an interesting question, right? The turn would be aiming for something. Black's got a cutting point. White is peeping the cutting point. And so black would need to read to solve this problem while also maintaining good direction in the process. And against this move, the easiest way for black to continue is actually just to extend and let white push. And again, what did we say that Shusaku was likely to do? Figure out the best direction to move and make a concession, right? So black can extend and simply concede. Because this net trade is going to be way better for black. All those points of territory that black let white catch up, black just got all of that back. And white got some influence, but it's going to be hard for white to use it, right? Black has the territorial advantage, and black's contesting white in the center. How does white win the game?
With
Is this making
difficulty.
sense? Well, the answer is he doesn't. But
yeah, well,
because there's white doesn't have an advantage on any part of the board right now. And that's the hard part, is that white doesn't have an advantage on any part of the board right now. It's difficult. Difficult for white to find a way forward in a position like this. um, Simply put, because black has erased white's forward momentum. There's no weak groups to work against, no important stones for white to attack. So starting in that list, white's got no weak groups either except the bottom. So, but there's no weak group for white's bottom stones to work against. So white's going to have to lean on something strong. But there's only one strong area white can really lean on, and that's this. And white has to do it in a way that affects the big place. But the only difficulty with that idea is it's black's turn.
Yeah.
Black ends this trade in Sente. And because black ends in Sente, that's one of the key factors when we're using this judgment, is who's going to end in Sente. That's a big one that comes up. I mean, that can make or break a variation when tempo is very tight. And just a quick definition, because tempo comes up a lot in these high balance games where everything rides on a sword edge. Tempo is basically, what's the best way to define this? It's like being able to get to a place with momentum, with Sente. Getting it in a way where your opponent has to respond in that moment precisely that way now, and then moving to the next big area. So black ending in Sente here means black has the tempo, the timing to come back and affect white's bottom group, his weak group, before white has a chance to use the weaknesses in this shape in particular against black, right? Even black can just make himself thick, get rid of all the weaknesses, and then what is white going to leverage to settle these stones? Now they're just a target. It's difficult. So in the game, white calculated that nothing directly worked, so he tried an indirect move, another tactical move, Tesuji. White's offering a concession to black, and he's trying to muddy the water a little bit. He's using this move to try to affect the corner. He wants to use some of the Aji at the Sansan point at A and bring that Aji, rope that Aji into this fight. Because white knows from his perspective of things, he needs a big, large-scale arrangement to occur where he can use his fighting and his experience, his, what I'm going to assume he thought was superior calculation, to beat Shusaku in a decisive fight and make up the advantage that way. But we can imagine, just using our knowledge of how Shusaku's been handling this game so far, Shusaku's going to do what? He's going to read all the variations that he can read, trying to figure out how to solve the position in the way that's going to give him the best direction to get to the next place, while conceding the least amount to white, maintaining a territory balance. That's what Shusaku's going to solve for here. So the question, we've got a weak stone on each triangle point. White is starting another contact fight with N17. Which stone is in more need of the help? Right? That's going to be determinative on what black wants to do next. Looking at this board, black is going to want to utilize his center influence some more, right? We don't just ignore all the stones that we have on the board, we want to bring them in. So how do we get these stones involved? We push. We begin drawing the fight south, where the wall can be useful. And we can kind of see how that direction influences Shusaku. He's going to read this variation and determine whether this is okay or not. If it wasn't okay, he might have considered this, or he might have considered something else, right? But in this case, it does work, and he chose the simplest working variation. White gets to take white's benefit against the corner. Black settles and begins to make some territory. As the note says, thanks for the territory, right? And white's got to continue. And we can see the fight is beginning to draw south now. These groups are now in combat. And black has support at square to use against it. All the while, this entire fight, black has been defending the A point by making white busy. So part of our judgment here is also making sure that at no point in the sequence is white able to come back to play A. And just to kind of skim through the rest of the fight really quick, because I think I've hammered the point home enough. Only when white finally comes out and black can delay direct defense no longer does black finally concede. But even here, he's doing it in a way that affects the white group. Now white does not have a base, and everybody is running to the center. So far, so clear?
For me, yes. For others, we should wait 10-15 seconds. And here, at least
I'm
in
waiting for
chat,
responses.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Perfect. By the way, white having to fight moving in the south direction is a nightmare. Can anybody in the chat tell me why? Pop quiz for those who watch later. I'm torturing your people, Trovoke. I'm not apologizing.
No, it's okay. I mean, this is what this is what they're going to be doing for 4 years, right?
Right. White's lower two stones are immediately going to be caught in the crossfire. Right? Because as black begins to move the fight in the center and the center becomes hotter and hotter, the question of these two stones become bigger and bigger. And so, positive, good job. You're able to see the real intention of why black is bringing the fight to the center. This is black's late game plan to win. And he's already thinking about how he's going to close the game out with it at move 60. But you guys can kind of see how it's a lot, right? When I would be reviewing pro games by myself, it's not uncommon for me to spend 4 hours on each of these topics, minimum, and to do one game over the span of 3 or 4 days. But you get a lot out of it. You really get a lot out of it. And it's easier when you've got a bunch of people that are able to kind of work on an individual aspect of it, because that's the only thing you have to look for, right? You don't have to factor in the other stuff. You just have to notate the direction. Even if you're in your analysis, you can't identify why one direction is better. At the very least, you can pose the question to the rest of us, and we can engage in discussion that way.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I'm very excited to do this and to get a bunch of folks to do this as a group, even if it has to be async because we're in different parts of the world or whatever the case may be. I'm looking forward to seeing a kind of community collaboration on this, especially now that we have Katago that can help us, with a strong enough player who's able to supply context on the Katago analysis, then we have essentially pro level support in our work. It doesn't replace us doing the work, but it can be very helpful.
Yeah, it's a good guide, I think, because it can point our attention to certain aspects, right? Like maybe another direction somebody thinks about is good, And it's worth maybe a tangent exploration during that part, just as a notation, even. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to benefit and get stronger from this. One of the real goals.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? So I'm looking forward to the analysis as well. Hopefully, with any luck, I'll be able to contribute to the positional judgment part of things, because that's kind of my bread and butter.
Yeah.
The thing I really enjoy the most. And I'm pretty confident with Jake in reading, because he's faster than I am at reading, I think.
Oh wow. Okay. All right.
And he's always dragging me into complicated things.
Faster but much worse.
Well, when you're thinking about a position, Jake, do you look at it like you just pick a move and then you just read the move that you're looking for, or do you solve it with the other two fundamentals in mind first? If you're more picky about your initial move selection, your reading will be much more accurate.
Yeah,
But reading accuracy is a whole nother ballgame.
That's true. I've found that my reading has quote unquote gotten better just because of better position judgment and direction of play, even though I'm still not very good at Sumego, but because the things I read are just the things I need to read, and those
Mhm.
tend to work a lot more often than the things I don't need to read.
Yep. I find it much easier to be able to prune bad moves out when I don't have to look at them at the
Yes.
start of my analysis. Jake says I pick a move and I pray.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's certainly one method. Hail Mary, Hail Mary strategy. Not, but here's the difference, DE. DDKs do it out of a lack of knowledge. Don level players do it out of laziness.
Yeah.
Of that, I am convinced. Because by the time you're Don level, at least by the time you're mid Don level, you should have some type of feeling for direction and judgment to some degree. You know, in terms of influencing a strategy. So if you're playing without a strategy, then or a plan, even you're not really going to get very far against somebody that has one. That's why when people listen to Travoke talk about Dosaku games, their natural inclination is to assume that he's a Don level player.
Nothing could be further. Well, actually, it's getting closer to the truth as time goes, but
Yeah, if someone would just work on their reading.
yeah. Well, that's what do you
Oh,
why do you think I'm doing this?
my whole screen went black. Why did my screen go black?
Good question.
What the? Sorry,
All right, so while
technical
Frozen is
difficulty.
looking at his screen going black, um, I have one note to make about Katago, and then if there are no questions and Frozen has nothing to add, I think we might be able to end this session.
All good on my end.
Okay. The one thing I want to add about Katago is one of the things that Michael Redman noticed about his analysis of strong games, like looking at Dosaku and Shusaku with Katago, is that because of the deeply intricate nature of these games compared to the somewhat more straightforward nature of most pro games today, especially given the complicated nature of the plans that Dosaku used to hatch, he would often have to put 25,000 visits on a given board position before Katago would change its mind and say, oh, this is not a 5-point mistake, this is actually a genius move. And this is one of the reasons why we're going to have Frozen in charge of the Katago section so that he can curate where the visits go and what Katago looks at, because otherwise we might be wasting a bit of time saying, oh, this is actually a mistake, and then it's like, well, no, actually, if you just go over here and look at the variations down this path, it turns out this is what can't be done.
I solved the problem of playout visits by just setting the default number of playouts to 30,000 for every game scan that I do.
There you go.
So it scans the whole game with 30,000 playouts per every move, and then it only lists moves that are 3 points or greater.
Yeah, there you go. That should work.
Easy peasy.
All right, last call for questions about positional judgment, direction of play, and reading, and how we're going to be using the 3-pass analysis in this project. What will be first reviews? First question, not about the topic I asked. No, but I knew this was coming. So I planned to have the first games be sent out to the group end of April, because I wanted to get a little bit more time to work out some of the kinks in flows and practice. But since Frozen has this first game out that's been Katagoed, but not frozened yet, we can actually just ask him, put him on the spot, and ask him when the first 2 games will be ready. And we can start the Sunday after that.
The next Sunday.
Okay, then next Sunday, April 10th, will be when we do the first reviews.
Hey.
So that's going to be the first 2 games next Sunday. We'll go through a week of positional judgment, and then the Sunday after that, so technically, Sunday, April 10th, we'll have the first 2 SGFs. We'll do positional judgment on them. And then the Saturday after that, in the same channel, the synthesis channel, we will go over the positional judgment analyses that have been done over the course of the week and come up with a synthesis of these analyses that we can use for as a basis for the next week in the direction of play, so that everyone can have the same basis for their work. And the Sunday after that, so the day after this analysis, we will be moving on to direction of play for these two games, and we will release the next two games for positional judgment, which is what Frozen explained at the beginning of this session.
Yeah. So we can all pick times if we want to do it together, the analysis, or we can work on our own judgment analysis separately and then come together on Saturday. Doesn't matter to me how we do it. I'm pretty much free at any time. For those that might be curious, I quit my day job, so I teach Go full time now.
Yay!
So I got nothing but time. Just shoot me a message whenever you guys are free, or post in the Discord, and I will collaborate with you. Because I will likely be starting mine tomorrow.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording for this now.
Okay.